Well, welcome to Crosspoint Church on this Labor Day weekend. We are so glad that you are with us. Welcome to It Came From Within, Part 3. We've been talking about our hearts. Not our physical heart, but that place deep within us where we live life from. For instance, when we fall in love, that happens in our hearts. When we fall out of love, that also happens in our hearts. That's why we say, somebody has gotten a broken heart. When people are going through really tough times, we say things like, man, my heart just aches for you. My heart really goes out to you. So all of us use this language of the heart. The Bible certainly uses this type of language. And Jesus was the master at using this kind of language. In fact, it's really how he kind of takes this idea and kind of puts a little twist on it. That's kind of the basis for this whole sermon. Because when Jesus talks about this, here's what he says. He says, from the things that come from our mouth come from our heart. In other words, that everything that we say and everything that we do, it comes ultimately from here. Now, for the last 2 weeks, we've been discussing how that we have these moments in our life where we kind of blurt out something, we say something that isn't right, we kind of explode something, comes out of our mouth, and we say things like this. We say, boy, that wasn't like me at all. And then we follow that up by saying something like this. I don't know where that came from. But Jesus would say to us, I do, it came from your heart. Because everything comes from our heart. You see, we live from our heart. We love from our heart. We lead from our heart. We parent from our heart. We do business from our heart. We conduct our relationships from our heart. When we give our money, we do that from our heart. Ultimately, this thing, our heart, it drives everything that happens in our life. That's what we've been discovering. Now, what's interesting about this is that not only Jesus said it, but Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, talked about this too. And he puts it this way. He says, above all else, guard your heart. I've been picturing that as a soldier standing in front of this door, that goes to my heart. That's how I've been picturing it. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Literally, it's where life comes from. So Solomon and Jesus, pretty good sources, I'd say, both said that, hey, it's really important that you pay attention to what's going on in your heart because it really does affect your life. This truth is so important for us today because all of us here, we live in a world that teaches us to monitor our behavior, but it doesn't teach us to develop the art of monitoring our heart. And it causes, and this truth kind of causes a dilemma in our life. It really does, because we've learned, all of us here, we've learned to develop our behavior. We have. That's how we got through school. That's how we've gotten in and out of some relationships. That's how we get a job. That's how we keep a job. That's kind of how we move from season to season in our life. We've kind of learned to navigate our lives through monitoring our behavior. But what we've discovered in the last couple of weeks is that's just not enough. Because sooner or later, one day, something is going to kind of slip through this behavior monitoring system that we have. Something's going to slip through the filter, and some kind of monster like this is going to burst to the surface. And we're going to say something, or we're going to do something that's going to cause major consequences in our life. Of course, we'll try to kind of, push it aside and say, well, boy, that wasn't like me at all. And we'll say things like, I don't know why I did that. And then we'll say this statement, will say, I've got to learn to do a better job monitoring my behavior. But Jesus would say to us, no, it's not what you need to work on. What you need to work on is learning to monitor your heart, because everything in life comes from this place. Everything we say and do. Now, last week, I'm just going to be honest with you, we talked about guilt. It was a sledgehammer for me. It was a hard week last week, and the message last week got me more than anybody here, I'm sure. But we talked about guilt, and we talked about how the monster of guilt, it does this horrible thing in our life. It causes this freaky imbalance in our relationships because it makes us feel this way. This is what guilt does. Guilt makes us feel like I owe you, I've stolen from you, taken something from you. And so if I don't pay this debt back, or if you don't forgive me of this debt, then I'm going to just live my whole life with this burden of guilt strapped to my back. What we discovered last week, here's the great news about guilt, I love this, is that confession to God and to others, that's the ouch part, confession to God and to others breaks the power of guilt in our life. That's one of the most important truths that you can learn in your life as Christians. So guilt breaks the power of, or confession breaks the power of guilt in our life. I'll just be honest, I put that to practice in my life this past week. I encourage you to just, live by that truth, because that's so good. Now, I hesitate to say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. I think, and I had a conversation with my wife, I think last week the guys probably got hit a lot harder than the women with the guilt thing. Okay? I did. I mean, I kind of been picking myself up in pieces this week. This thing, jealousy, while I certainly have my share of it, that's what we're going to talk about today. I think that this is going to come a little closer to the women. So women, just buckle down. It's going to be a bumpy ride, okay? But it's for all of us. Guys, certainly don't tune this out. Today we're going to talk about jealousy. And jealousy is kind of an awkward topic. And you know why? Because at first, here's what we think about jealousy. We'd say, I don't have a problem with jealousy. Maybe I had a problem when I was 6 or 7 because, my friend had a bigger Tonka truck than I had. Or she had more Barbie dolls than I have. But hey, I don't have a problem with jealousy. Jealousy is for kids. It's not for adults. That's what we tend to think. Because if we would say this, if I would come up to you and say, well, I'm jealous, of so-and-so, or of him or her, you'd say to me, well, get a grip, Harv, grow up. Jealousy isn't for kids. And so because we don't tend to use this language of jealousy, we don't talk that way, here's what happens. We don't think that we struggle with jealousy at all. But the fact is, we do struggle with jealousy. It's just kind of masked over in our life, and we're kind of unaware of it. But the truth is that all of us, at some level, deal with the issue of envy and jealousy. All of us do. Because you know what? There's somebody in our life, and we just don't like them. We're not even sure why we don't like them. But if we were to dig around long enough and examine our hearts, we would find out the reason that we don't like them, is because they are ahead of us in some area. They have something that we don't have. They've acquired something that we haven't acquired. Maybe they got that somebody, that special somebody that we didn't get. And sure, they've worked hard, but not quite as hard as we have. But for some reason, they've achieved more. So there's something about them that causes an emotional response within us to say, I just don't like them. But if we were to dig around and pry around and examine our hearts, we would find that the reason we don't like them is because